Hey,
Hi, Leo.
there's my favorite. How are you?
Oh my God, you know what? I was thinking, I was like, how am I going to introduce you? I was like, it's my all-around favorite PI, one of my all-around favorite people in the world. I am good. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. This was a bad storm we had up here. I don't know about where you are, but we got a pretty good amount of ice and snow.
We
So
got ice and stuff yesterday, but not
yeah,
today.
yeah,
Today it's sunny.
yeah. So I'm a remote today, as you can tell. This is not my normal office.
It's,
Uh,
you know what? I was just gonna say that's a sweet off. Like I love that. Did
actually,
Sherry decorate all that, or was that you?
this some of it half and half, but she actually said the other day. She said this is time for an overdue. It's been 25 years since
Well,
20
it
years
looks brand new to
together.
me. It looks great.
Yes. Anyway, it's good to see your face. I was trying to remember when the last time we actually connected. That's been a while.
A really long time. Maybe like 2 years, I think, when we were talking about training fellows and
Yes,
well, it's
rapid. You
fun.
were the rapid person. Yes.
My wife actually says funny, so I was like, I'm so tired this morning. I'm like, God, is it only Monday? And then I and I'm like, I have a meeting at 10, and then I'm meeting with Leo, and she's like, oh my God, you love Leo, and like she remembers you from all those years ago.
Well,
It's
that's
like,
good
yeah,
to
and I
know
work
that
with his
somebody.
wife too. It's amazing.
Oh, she
Well,
loves
I
you. She loves you more than I do because she's like, gosh, I just want to just absorb what Vanessa knows. She's always so easier to help
oh
and
my gosh, wow,
man.
that's so nice.
Oh yeah, no,
That's high praise
she
indeed,
watches
actually, because
your
I love your wife. She's fucking brilliant.
I guess you call it podcast or whatever your I get them
My
too through LinkedIn.
my
Do you call it
YouTube channel.
your YouTube? She watches, and so she's on it. So she learns a lot
Oh my
from.
God, that's so nice. Like you make the videos and you never really know who's watching. And
Oh,
like,
I can tell you she does for sure. I can
that's
honestly say
amazing.
I don't as much unless it's something I can link
Leo,
relate.
how could you?
But if it's something I should do it just so I can see you and hear your voice. That should do even if I
Well,
don't
I am
even if I don't
so
understand it.
well, actually, that's why I wanted to have you on today. So, first of all, welcome, Leo Otterbein, professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School, and or not.
I do a couple things for the medical center. One hat is the chairman of the IACUC committee, so
Yep.
see all the a lot of the animal research, if not all of it. And I am the director of the career development office, Center for Career Development, and the translational arm of it. We have two of us. My other half does all the clinical side, so I'm more overseeing the researchers, if you will, and not as much the clinicians, but it does overlap because there's clinicians that want to be physician scientists, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'll speak with them as well. And our focus is diverse. We look at all kinds of things related to mentoring and grant writing and dealing with problems in labs and all that kind of stuff. So it's a multiple hats, and then the other 50% of my time I try and do research.
Well, actually, and so I full disclosure, I used to be Leo's RA. So tell people who do not know what you do, tell us a little bit about your research.
So my research, I it's a good thing. It's a good question. I try and categorize. If somebody says to me, "What do you do?" Particularly if it's somebody who's not in science, it's hard to describe. Believe it or not, you say, "Well, I do research." Oh, what do you research? Well, I study, diseases like trauma and cancer, and oh, usually they relate to one of those type of
Mhm.
things. So if I was to capture it, I have a lot of I have interest in purely clinically relevant areas. I don't really interested in studying disease for disease's sake per se. If
Mhm.
it's really to help the human condition, if you will. Um, and so what I've always associated myself with is clinical centers than teaching hospitals because I find that that's where the interesting questions come from. Why, for instance, does the trauma patients die from infection and not their trauma? And it's a fascinating question as to what happens in the body. And we try and find solutions to that and answer the questions that the clinicians have. As I always say, they have questions but no answers. We have answers but no questions. And so
You work
combined,
together, you're like Voltron. You
so if we work together, we should be a great team, and that does work its way through. I've had some great collaborations and interactions with clinicians, both just pure clinical and clinical researchers. My research is interested in the biology of gases, gas molecules. You might remember that one of
I remember.
my gases of interest that people say, why do you study it? Is carbon monoxide. And so I spend a lot of time my lab spends a lot of time thinking about that gas. And it's evolved from an idea that was the basis of my PhD research into the fact that you could use low amounts of carbon monoxide for benefit. And that has resulted over 20 years into ongoing clinical trials. So it's unique, and I was privileged to be able to say that, or have been able to say that I've taken an idea from bench into the clinic that is in trials, and we'll see how those things progress. But the all indications seem to think that it'll be beneficial in different disease states, particularly sickle cell anemia, organ transplant, trauma, infection. So there's a lot of areas, and so we spend our days thinking about how does carbon monoxide actually do things in the body, and we still have lots of questions and no answers. So it keeps us busy.
It
So
keeps you busy. It's basically
it keeps us busy for sure. And the general field that we like to call ourselves is gasotransmitters. These are the smallest of small molecules that have remarkable impact on the body. And the obvious one is oxygen, right? Without oxygen,
right. Well, you die without that.
you die without oxygen. So there's a lot of gases in the body, particularly in the intestine, as you might imagine. And believe it or not, those things are of value. They do things in the body other than things that we don't like to think about, like smell bad. But the purpose of gases is unique, and it has its role, and that's what we study.
Oh my
So
God. I'll tell you, over the years, I've been really, really like, I have become obsessed with like my gut instincts and guts and your body and the things that, so when you're saying that gases make such a big difference, I think to myself, my God, that was a whole layer I hadn't even thought of because I've been thinking about like bacteria and other, and now I'm like, oh my God, the gaseous interaction with the bacteria or there, and now suddenly I'm like, I have a whole thing to learn for my own personal development. So thank you for that.
but there's many gases that people don't even think about. That bacteria, to use your example, bacteria generate an unusual array of gases that presumably, and nobody's really, some have an effect on the body in and of themselves. You change your diet, you change your bacteria.
Hmm.
You change your gases. You change your gases, you change your response to stress and disease and life. So it's an all or interactive system.
What a cool, cool thing you study. So the reason why I wanted to have you on is because you, just by your description of the work that you do, you have a vested sort of like your passion is education, training, helping to bring bench research to the bedside, as they say. And this just recently, we had the change to the announcement from the NIH about indirect costs and how indirect costs were going to be slashed 15 to 15%. Now, that's been assuaged a little bit, but I still think and thought that it was worth having a conversation with an investigator because you do the science, you do the research, you've applied for these grants, I've applied for them with you.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to know from a researcher's perspective, someone who how do you view indirects? Like, do you find them to be cumbersome? Like, do you find them to be helpful? Like, what are your general thoughts on it?
IDCs, to use the term that we always hear, it's always been a mystery to me. And the reason is because we really don't, as investigators, PIs, we don't know where they go. I mean, we know when we apply for grants that they're there. We know that they support infrastructure, but we really don't have a concept, and maybe we should, into how does that money, that value get broken down and distributed in the hospital or the medical center or the university, and where does it actually go to, and what does it support? And so that's been the best word I would describe it as to many. In fact, since all this has happened, there's been a number of people that come into my office that are asking me about what their situation could look like or might look like, or should I
Yeah.
be, some approaching this in a different way. And I think the mystery of it is one that's somewhat frustrating, I would say, because there's really never transparency on what happens to those dollars. And maybe it's
Hmm.
information that we would be bored to death with. This portion goes to rent, this portion goes to electricity, this portion goes to water. And maybe that would be like, I don't really care anymore. Okay, you bored me, I'm
I'm
done. Okay.
sorry I asked the question.
Yeah, sorry, I asked the question. I really don't care. But then there's a portion of it that the portion of your of thinking about it where you say maybe I shouldn't want to know where it goes and how it gets used, and is it repurposed for things that are not the obvious, right? That you hear about things like it helps support bridge funding, or it helps support um, things that you didn't really think, like core facilities that you wouldn't necessarily put into that bucket because you budget for your other your own portion of the grant, but you don't think about it. That big one that people came to me about was, how does this impact the animal facility in our case, right? How does it
Hmm.
impact animal research? What IDC, because nobody knew that, right? They don't know how many vet techs we have. They don't know
Yeah.
that there's directors and associate directors and supervisors that are all integral to the survival and the maintenance of a very active and very successful animal facility. That's an IDC. So I would say to them that the IDC is helping with that as well. So there are very important components to the IDC. Um, but how every dollar gets spent and directed, that's the mystery of things that I think would be, it would probably be better if it was somehow provided in some chart. I don't know how you would present it. I'd turn to you with your
Yeah, I don't,
argument.
I'm thinking about it myself because this is an interesting conundrum because I think that like one of the, and this is actually, when I think about it, about my taxes, for example, right? Like I want to know where my taxes are going. I want to know what they're doing. I want to, and so it's like, if is it going to pay for a school? Is it going to pay, and and it's not like I don't want to pay into supporting the community, but I'd like to know how it is done. And I think like, when we are constantly in any organization, and we've seen this across the country, where people are being forced to do more with less, and the IDCs aren't changing or they're increasing, but like the question then becomes is, I'm still bringing in the same amount of IDC. Why am I being forced to do more with less support, and then the question becomes, where is my money actually going? You know what I mean? Like I
Right.
can see how that would be a challenge. Um,
Particularly when you get into an academic center where there isn't the like with pharma where they have this, they have everything at their beck and call. They need something, they get it. Because the biggest enemy in biotech and pharma, from my experience, I spent some time in biotech and pharma, is time, right? So their concern is different. Their issue is we don't have an issue. We have to monitor funds, of course, and resources, but
mhm.
that's not our primary concern. We have a timeline that has to be met. And so we need to get the dollars out of the picture, and whatever you need is we'll get you. And with academic, it's more with less, to use your words, right? Because we still work with antiquated equipment and stuff that we would love to have the latest version of, the latest, operating system or the latest, gadget or whatever that would certainly facilitate our research, but we're stuck with limiting ourselves to what we can afford. And as well as I know, you can only budget so much for a piece of equipment. And then where how am I gonna, this is $100,000 piece of equipment that I guess I won't eat, because I can't pay my salary. So there's those considerations. And so there's a big gap between what can be accomplished. And I think that's what maybe where distinctions between those who are looking at this, who are non-scientists, is how is the information transmitted that says this is how academic centers operate, and this is how pharma operates, and they're very different.
Different, yeah.
And so maybe there's hopefully there's a time where these two forces will come together, the people who are viewing this and saying, this is why academics has the IDC it does. And that'll come out hopefully in discussions. I don't know. I mean, that's what remains to be seen. I think there's an interesting component to this, which is we're unique, of course, in that we're one of the few medical centers, medical institutions, if you will, that are affiliated hospitals versus university. So
Hmm.
there is no Harvard hospital per se.
Yeah.
If you go to Iowa or Johns Hopkins or to Georgetown or pick whatever, Stanford, there's a Stanford Medical Center, medical school, and then there's a Stanford hospital, and they're like this. Here you have Harvard University that's got its own world, and then the hospitals are affiliated. So it's different. It's unique, and at
Yeah.
least locally. So
You
that's it.
know, and I think that actually brings to mind like an interesting question, right? Because like one of the statements that came out, and I can't remember exactly how it was phrased because the announcement looked like it was written by a 12-year-old sent through AI, but there was a section in there that talked about all the endowments that the various universities have.
Right.
And I think that like based off what I'm hearing, it sounds like, and my own experience, it doesn't like that money doesn't look like what you think it does. It's not like you have, this $50 million endowment that you can just draw down on like a bank account, or Harvard has this endowment, but the hospitals don't have that endowment, right? And so like you still have to be able to work from that space. Um, when you were talking earlier about, so we were talking a little bit about IDC earlier, and we were talking about how PIs typically feel about IDC, and you talked about how it's not transparent. I want to come back to that just a little bit again because one of the questions I did have is, does your opinion, because I know you've submitted for foundations and you've submitted for NIH, so where somewhere you get $100,000 in total costs where the IDC has to come out of it, and then the $100,000 plus the IDC. So I'm curious to know, like, when you're talking to because a lot of fellows and people who are applying for foundation type grants are going to find that they are either doing the 0% IDC or they're doing things that like will take money because they're not applying for R21s or R01s. They're applying for like smaller grants. Um, how do you feel like IDC impacts the desire of PIs to want to submit grants, especially when taking into consideration total cost versus, does that question make sense?
I think I know where you're going. I think again, it's this mystery of what IDCs actually do. I mean, I think most PIs, including the fellows that are learning, that they all understand what the purpose of IDCs are. They don't get into the weeds with, well, how was 74% or 72%? How was that determined? And how does that get figured out? And I'm sure there's lots of justification and rationale or it wouldn't be approved. So somewhere, somebody, some group must have said, we agree with your rationale and your justification, so we're going to give you this percentage as your IDC rate. I think fellows and most faculty, I would say, including myself, it's always just been, yeah, at it, because it doesn't really impact our research. So we're working on the other side of the page, right? We're working on the direct, how much am I going to get
Yeah.
do my work? And again, I justify the work based on the amount of money. So, a lot of times, and I've sat on study sections for 20 some years, that you get the balance between convincing a reviewer that you can get the work done and you've included enough to get the work done
Yeah.
justifies the money. So there's a balance there in terms of when you come back to helping grant the review fellows write grants and helping them understand how to write the direct portion. And the indirect has always been, oh yeah, don't forget, you have to just
Don't forget, tack that on.
yeah, your research administrator is going to add the other. They'll take care of all that. And every once in a while they'll say, "What does that IDC do?" And I'll say, "That's a good question."
That
And
is
then
a really good question.
it
By
is.
the way, Leo, I have a video on my YouTube channel. It's 22 minutes long that talks exactly about how IDCs are calculated. It's a great video, very entertaining.
Okay,
There you go. I was like, well, as a matter of fact, I have a video about this.
you need to send me the
Um,
link. Yeah,
oh
send me.
shit, I had a question for you. You like had this. Oh, yeah, yeah. Do you find that, and I'm curious about this. Well, actually, you when you're reviewing grants, now I just have to ask this question. Does this conversation come up when you you get the budget, you get the grant? Like do you get projects where you're like, this is a really ambitious project, but this budget is not going to be able to get this done? Like, is that something? Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
that's
100%. 100%. It's usually again, it's usually this balance between, and this is where you need to really understand how the science is done. Can you really accomplish? Can you, as an example, if you get let's say a 5-year R01, and you have described in your research strategy that you're going to do 7,500 mice in that period of time, and they're complicated surgeries, and you look at it and you say, well, if I can do, how many mice would I have to do a day or a week in order to accomplish the goals of reaching that total, right? As an example, or I'm going to collect, if you look at a human side, you can say, I'm going to collect 10,000 specimens from 10,000 patients.
oh
Say,
my God.
no, you're not, unless you've got an army and 5 hospitals. No, you're not. So yeah, but you'll get the reviewers who will say, let's go the opposite way. And you say, okay, I'm going to propose to do, 52 mice and I'm going to collect 12 samples. And you say, well, then you're never going to be busy enough. So you're going the opposite,
Right.
right? You've asked for all this money to do, 12 samples. Now, unless they're really unique and they're super valuable and you're going to generate lots and lots and lots of data. So there's a balance of how you evaluate that. But ultimately you've got to say, can you afford to do what you say? And here's where the challenges become for some right now. And people come to my office and ask this question. They say, the NIH says I can have $250,000. I know you can ask for more. We can talk about that. But on average, $250,000 a year. Here's my salary. I need to hire a postdoc or a technician, and this is their new salary because that changed, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm going to have enough money to get the work done. You say, well, where can you budget better? And that in of itself is a topic, which we hope that, maybe we still will pull your expertise in to talk about how do you
Oh,
generate.
it's my favorite topic to talk about is how do
It's
you develop a
so
budget?
it's so important because for people to understand, because you say, well, I'll just drop my effort, right, or my percent, time on this. And well, if you only have 5% effort, then you're never going to be around
How are
enough.
you to be doing the work?
Say, but then if you go the other way and say I'm going to support 25 of my percent of my salary, and you make a decent salary, as most clinical sciences do, for instance, they'll say, well, between that and a postdoc, you're going to have not much money left to really take care of the research you want to do. So that becomes its own question of can you, they haven't raised the salaries and everything, and cost of everything has gone up, but the limits that the
Have
NIH
not gone up. Yep.
have not changed at all. So your work budget, so to speak, your antibodies and your animals and everything else is just getting smaller and smaller while everything else is getting bigger and bigger. And so then you're up against, if I budget this way and a reviewer looks at this and says, well, you're going to spend $200,000 on salary, but that's probably a little generous. Can you get the work done with $50,000 a year?
Yep.
Divide that by 12, you're talking a few $100 a month, 5 days a week of work by a full-time postdoc. They're not going to be busy enough. So anyway, that's a different discussion,
Oh,
but
and it's actually because as you're talking about this, and we were just totally going to geek out now, this is going to be the funnest thing to edit because it's basically going to be a bunch of short conversations because we're all over the place. So I love talking to you. Well, because here's the thing, right? Because as you're saying that, over the years, I've managed many different types of portfolios at this point, right? And I started out in bench research with animals. So and then I went to your lab, which again, animals.
yep.
Um, and then, um, and then I went to an organization and worked with a client who did only data, like only data. And so they had two expenses, salaries and so much money to buy data, right? Like that was it. They had no other expenses. And when I first looked at it, my first thought was, there's something wrong here. I then had to go look at the science and I was like, I understand now what it is that they're doing and why it's budgeted this way. And so now I'm like, all right. So I think to your point, I think it's having when the reviewers have that insight to be able to say, what am I reviewing? What are the needs? And I think that, as you said, most new fellows and people submitting new grants, they're not educated on how to budget for a grant. And so it's sort of just like, what do I put in the kind of just throw numbers here and there, which is where I think research administrators and people like yourself who do this kind of mentorship and training is so valuable to help them build that next level of the research enterprise.
Right. And I think that the difference between, say, an NIH grant and a DoD contract, that's in and of itself its own interesting discussion about how you think about those. What I'll get commonly with a fellow or a postdoc is, what if I propose this aim and this hypothesis or this set of experiments, and then I find that that's really not what that's really not interesting as I thought it was, and now I'm going to do it. I've taken a tangent and I'm going to do this. Can I do that? How do I justify doing that? Can I, it's those kind of questions that you don't really think about, and then all of a sudden you're not doing what you said in the grant, and you've shifted. And the NIH has flexibility with that. The Department of Defense, for instance, sometimes does not, because they say, this is what you proposed, this is
What
what
you
you got
got to
to do.
do.
Nothing more, nothing less, unless you give a really good and they're very good with, which I found, because I've been funded by them for a number of years now, very, very open to the science and doing things that make sense. But it's a different type of thinking. And just questions that come up as you're raising with, how does a fellow look at this? Because it may be that you have to shift your expenses because things that in your new experiments are different in
Yeah.
cost, whatever you need, and that's a balance in and of itself. So I think at the end of the day, the fellows, because they're not accountants, they just let the RA research administrators, the RAs do what they need to do, and the RAs say, well, that must make sense because that's what you've proposed.
Right.
We'll just make the numbers go the right way, and nobody's really nitpicking the details. Not many, some do, but not many.
Well, I think that's one of I think that there's two different ways of approaching research administration, right? There's the one way where I am a business partner with you and we're doing this together, which is what, I think that I was really fortunate as I was developing as an RA to have those kinds of relationship with investigators. You're a born educator, and so there were so many hours in my office and your office where you would teach me about a lot of these things that helped me to become a better partner and understand. I still do a lot of the things that we're talking about right now because I know that that's what I bring to the table. On the flip side, there's only so much time, right? So I have, sometimes I'm like, listen, I can't help, and I'm going to throw something together for you and then you're going to have to run with it and do your thing.
Right.
I'm curious though, because right now there is a lot of, as we start to sort of get to the end, the IDC change is just one symptom in a larger, challenging space that we find ourselves in scientifically right now. And a lot of people are scared. A lot of people are scared about what they think is going to happen. And, having grown up in Pakistan, this is not my first dictatorship rodeo. So, it's like, oh, hey,
Right.
still sucks, by the way. It still really fucking sucks. But I'm curious to
Hey,
know, like, based off in your experience, like, just sort of how are you approaching these next, how are you steeling yourself for this, and what are your thoughts about how what we might see evolve over the next couple of years?
my again, as my career Center for Career Development hat wearing person, individual, they come to me with that question, and my short term answer is may seem as a cop out, which is I'm not so sure we know yet what we're up against until some more things get fleshed out.
Hmm.
I think we have to have confidence in the leadership that we have, and I've been very impressed with how much the communication has been coming from the chief academic officer and the presidents and the CEOs and all those individuals, to know that they're still, and the research administration as well, to know that they're still taking this to task. They're gonna argue it and they're gonna educate, I think, is a big piece of this. So my answer is, again, it might be a cop out, is I don't know what's going to happen because I don't think anybody does just yet. I think we have to be flexible. We may be ready for change, which nobody wants to hear, right? Things may be different. And I said, we can sit here and look at the glass half empty all for days and say I might as well just quit and go, work at a pharma or take another career choice. But maybe the glass half full. Maybe this is a good thing, and maybe we haven't realized it yet, as painful as it may be. And that when we come out on the other side, it may be, hey, what if the pay lines go up? What if the hospitals have found a way to negotiate in a way that's maybe compromises such that they're not putting as much requirement in the IDC? And I can't speak to that. I'll be the first one to say I don't understand how they generated the 72%, nor do I probably need to be. But let's say it could be flexible down to 50%, arbitrary number.
Yeah.
That allows the number of grants that can be funded to go up. So the pay lines go up. That's a win-win. Now, maybe the hospitals might say, well, but we're going to be out 22% that we should have had, blah, 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 blah. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, the PIs have to rebudget maybe in their next grants and funnel that into their own direct costs. I have to add more to take care of my animals. I got to add more to take a portion of a salary that of a research administrator or whatever that I didn't consider. And so I think we have to be open-minded. I think we have to be creative. I think we have to be optimistic that this is not death just yet. I don't think that's what the goal is here, is to kill all of research in America, academic research that is. And we know that it can't all be done by pharma. It just
Yeah.
can't. They work on a different, as we talked about, they work on a different type of scale, different type of approach. It's time. Ours is discovery. Theirs is time. We have to get something to market or we're done. So they can't spend time doing stuff that we do.
Right. Just sort of like, I have an idea. I want to, I'm going to sit here and figure this idea out
Yeah.
just based off of curiosity.
I was the first one when I was working with Bart, and that's one of the reasons why I left pharma. I said, I have a good idea. They're like, we don't want your idea. Just go do this to get this information because you're not going to have a job.
Tell us
So
about your
go
idea,
get the
Leo.
information. Don't think, just do, right? It's like, oh, it's so boring, but there's a place for it. And
Yeah,
then
no, for sure. And I'm with you. I agree with you. I don't actually think it's a cop out. I think that it is way too early to make any assessments. But also, as you said, like, so fun fact about the 70%, 80%, however they're negotiate whatever it ends up being negotiated. There's actually like the giantest spreadsheet you ever did see. Like, I can't even tell you. So my sister has negotiated one of these. She's like, I'm never fucking doing this again. I'm never
I wouldn't
doing
even
this
want to
again.
touch it. I wouldn't even
It
see.
like the spreadsheet, and they do this calculation, and then they like it's a whole thing between us and like the people who are negotiating it and the agency it's being negotiated with to and then once they decide what it is, they still print it out on this old mimeograph paper like it came out in 1977, which I don't know why they do that. Like, we now have technology that allows us to type it out normally, but oh well. Um, but
We have to be. I think we have to be open-minded.
I agree.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we rent space in the Center for Life Sciences. Is that negotiable? I mean, we pay per square foot. So maybe we tell those guys, look, IDC rates change, so you're going to have to change the rent, or you're going to be out of 5 tenants, right? Or you're
Right.
5 floors of tenants. So
I agree. I think that
too many things that could play into this.
there are I think that the change has to come because we all know everyone who's in research and academia knows that the way that things are being done is not working right now. It's not working the way we want it to. And I think we people don't change until their lack of change has cost them enough, right? That's just sort of the way it is, or somebody forces you into it. And so I feel like, regardless of how it turns out, it is going to force everyone to look at everything, right? And say, how are we doing this? Why are we doing it this way? Just know, like, how
Change is sometimes good, and most of the times it is. You get a fresh view of things.
I think there's another thing, transparency issue. So one, I think it's transparency issue with IDCs and what happens with all of those. What happens with philanthropy money when it comes in? Why do some people get it and some people not? But I also think of the transparency, like in terms of how pipelines are created, right? Like it's not a Leo, you did this one thing, and then now we're gonna find this answer, and then we're gonna go to clinic. It's like you did one thing, then you worked with this guy over here, who then worked with that guy over there, and then you collectively got together, and over the 20 years, you've developed this thing. But like if someone was to look at the clinician who's there doing it, they're like, ah, the clinician gets the money. And it's like, well, that's not kind of how that worked.
It is, and that's and again, they've earned it. They've got that training. They've got that relationship with whoever the donor is. So there's a level of that, but it just seems like there could be maybe I'm just jealous that I don't have those
I think
expertise.
we spitball things, and then hey, listen, if I had millions of dollars, I'd give you some of it. I'm just telling you, I would. I would, Leo. One day I'm gonna win the lottery, and I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna fund. Tell me more about gases, Leo.
Yes, that's the motto in our lab. We got gas, so that's always a good thing to have, right? It's most of the time.
Well, as we wrap up, then, Leo, is there any last thing that you wanted to share with our listeners who are research administrators and or new fellows?
All I can say is that I'm your biggest fan. You got pizzazz. I think that's the way I would like to describe you. If that's
Me
appreciated.
personally or them?
You. I
Keep
would just
going, Leo.
say,
Keep going.
I would just say, if you want to learn anything about research and just have enthusiasm, this is the person to listen to. And I look forward to hopefully talking to you again. But the words of wisdom, I think you gotta be patient and let the system work out. But don't be afraid to voice your opinion at the end of the day, because I think all of us collectively can achieve more together than we can individually, as that saying goes. But I was absolutely stay tuned to this lady. She's got it going on. This person right here is got it going on.